The sun hung low over the arid plains, casting long, golden shadows that danced across the rugged terrain. Dust swirled in the wind, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and distant wildflowers. For Jonah McCall, a weathered cowboy with lines etched deep from years of toil and solitude, this was just another afternoon on the trail. Yet something in the air felt different, a tension he couldn't name, a pulse beneath the quiet that made his hand linger on the grip of his revolver. Ahead, a figure emerged from the horizon, a lone warrior on horseback, draped in shadows and a mask that hid every hint of identity. Jonah's instincts flared. He had faced outlaws, bandits, and desperados, but there was something otherworldly about this presence. The warrior's horse moved with precise, deliberate grace, and the glint of steel under the fading sunlight made Jonah tighten his jaw. As the two riders approached, the world seemed to narrow to a single point, the two figures, their horses' hooves kicking dust, the air thick with unspoken challenge. Jonah could see the warrior's movements were trained, practiced, almost poetic. Every swing of the sword, every deft dodge, spoke of discipline honed over years, maybe decades. Jonah's first instinct was caution. "Who are you?" he called out, his voice steady but carrying the weight of a man ready for combat. The warrior said nothing, simply circling him, testing, analyzing, as if this dance was a game only they knew the rules to. Then, in a flurry of motion, steel met steel, and the fight began. The clash of swords echoed across the canyon walls. Jonah's heart pounded, adrenaline surging. He had faced many skilled opponents before, but this was unlike anything he had encountered. The warrior's strikes were precise, almost effortless, yet there was a grace, a rhythm, that made Jonah hesitate, even admire. He realized this opponent was not just fighting for victory but for something else entirely. Minutes stretched into a blur of motion, sweat and dust mingling on Jonah's brow. Each parry, each swing, carried a story, a history, but he could not decipher whose. And then, in the middle of a particularly daring maneuver, the helmet slipped. Time seemed to pause. Jonah froze, sword midair, eyes wide, as the mask fell to reveal a woman. Not just any woman, a warrior, fierce and unyielding, with eyes that mirrored the strength of countless battles fought in silence. Her hair, dark and braided, shimmered like obsidian in the sunset, and the scars along her arms spoke of survival, courage, and relentless determination. Jonah's heart raced, not with fear, but with awe. "You," he whispered, almost unable to form the words. She met his gaze steadily, and for a moment, the fight was forgotten. All that remained was recognition, of strength, of honor, and of the humanity that transcended gender, expectation, or preconception. Her voice, when it came, was calm but resonant. "You judge too quickly," she said. "Courage isn't measured by your assumptions, Jonah McCall." Jonah stepped back, lowering his sword, feeling the weight of humility settle in his chest. This wasn't a battle of dominance or pride. This was a moment of awakening. In that instant, he understood that the world was far larger, far more intricate than he had allowed himself to believe. For the next few days, Jonah couldn't shake the image of her face from his mind. Her presence haunted the canyons and mesas he traversed, not as a threat, but as a challenge to the very core of who he thought he was. He returned to the small town of Silver Creek, a place where dust gathered in corners and stories of outlaws were told by men whose eyes had long since lost wonder. But now Jonah saw everything differently, the people, the sunlit plains, the distant mountains, it all seemed to hum with possibility. It was there, in the town's modest general store, that he first saw her again. She moved among the crowd with an unassuming grace, her sword now sheathed, her helmet gone. No longer the imposing masked warrior, she was just a person, but one whose presence commanded respect without demanding it. Jonah felt a flicker of unease. How could someone so formidable live among ordinary folk without stirring fear or envy? "Looking for something, cowboy?" she asked, her voice warm but tinged with amusement. He almost didn't recognize her, yet her eyes, the same fierce, unwavering gaze, locked with his. I was just," Jonah faltered, embarrassed. He wasn't used to words failing him, yet here he was, tongue-tied in front of a woman who had changed everything about his understanding of strength. She smiled, just slightly, and walked past him toward the back of the store. Jonah followed, compelled not by curiosity alone, but by an inexplicable pull, a sense that he was meant to understand something he had never considered before. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and earth, promising a storm. She had mounted her horse, preparing to leave, when a shout cut through the quiet. A small boy, no older than 10, had wandered onto the edge of the river that skirted the town. He slipped on the muddy bank, tumbling into the current, screaming as the water swept him downstream. Jonah's instincts kicked in. He dashed toward the riverbank, but the current was swift and the boy's cries desperate. Without hesitation, the warrior dove into the water, her figure slicing through the river with a strength that seemed impossible. She reached the boy, cradling him against her chest, her movements precise, careful, yet urgent. Jonah helped guide them back to shore, both of them soaked, exhausted, but alive. The boy clung to her, shaking with terror and relief. Thank you, he stammered. She looked at Jonah, and for the first time, the weight of her history seemed to rest lightly on her shoulders. Strength, she said softly, isn't about who wins fights. It's about who chooses to act when it matters. Jonah's chest tightened. He realized then that all his years of wandering, of solitude and rugged independence, had been preparation, not for battles, but for understanding courage in its truest form. Here was a woman who had lived every day as a warrior, not for fame or recognition, but to protect, to serve, to act when the stakes were human lives. Over the following weeks, Jonah found himself drawn into her world. She taught him not only swordsmanship, but patience, strategy, and most importantly, empathy. They traveled together, rescuing stranded families, protecting towns from raiders, and leaving small acts of kindness in their wake. Jonah began to understand that heroism wasn't measured in headlines or gunfights, but in compassion, the willingness to put oneself in danger for the sake of another. One evening, by a campfire under a sky blazing with stars, Jonah finally asked the question that had haunted him. Why hide under a mask? Why let people fear you? She stared into the fire, her expression distant. Because people judge before they understand. I wanted them to see my actions, not my identity. I wanted courage to be recognized for what it is, not who wears it. Jonah nodded slowly, the flames reflecting in his eyes. I thought I understood strength, but I see now it's more than that. It's about heart, about choices, about standing up even when no one is watching. A silence settled over them, profound and comforting. For the first time in his life, Jonah felt that solitude could be shared, that his wandering soul had found a companion who challenged him, inspired him, and revealed the depth of humanity he had overlooked. Weeks turned into months, and Jonah and the warrior, whose name he finally learned was Aiyana, continued their travels, leaving small towns safer and communities stronger. Yet, the true test of their courage would come not from raiders or harsh terrain, but from a threat far closer to home. Silver Creek had been thriving quietly, its people trusting the invisible shields of the desert and the vigilance of their own courage. But one morning, Jonah rode back to town alone and found smoke curling into the sky. Panic surged in his chest as he spurred his horse toward the source, the smell of burning wood and scorched earth filling his lungs. A band of merciless bandits had descended upon Silver Creek, looting and threatening those who had done nothing to provoke them. Aiyana arrived moments later, her horse thundering beside him. Her eyes narrowed, but her demeanor was calm, a storm waiting to strike. The townsfolk were huddled in fear, clutching whatever possessions they could save. Jonah's hand trembled not from fear, but from the urgency of protecting lives. The bandits laughed at the sight of two riders, assuming a man and a woman would be easy to intimidate. But Aiyana moved with a precision that was terrifying in its beauty. Each strike disarmed, each movement shielded, each decision kept the innocent safe. Jonah found himself not just fighting beside her, but trusting her instinct completely, surrendering his pride to her leadership. Amid the chaos, a small girl became separated from her family, frozen in terror near the center of town. Jonah reached her just as a bandit approached, but Aiyana, moving faster than the eye could follow, intercepted the threat. The girl's eyes widened as she saw the warrior, the mask gone, revealing the woman who had become legend in the town's whispers. Jonah caught the girl, cradling her in his arms. It's all right, he said gently. You're safe now. He realized then that heroism was not in the fight, but in this, protecting, reassuring, giving hope. As the last of the bandits fled, chased away by the courage and strategy of the two riders, the townsfolk emerged, their expressions a mixture of awe and gratitude. They no longer feared the masked warrior, or the cowboy who had once been just another face in the dust. They understood the essence of courage, kindness, and humanity, mirrored in Jonah and Aiyana's actions. That night, under a sky ablaze with stars, the town gathered to celebrate survival, unity, and heroism. Fires flickered in every corner, laughter mingling with relief. Jonah and Ayanna stood together, silently acknowledging the journey that had brought them here. He finally understood that strength was meaningless without compassion, and courage hollow without selflessness. Ayanna turned to him, her eyes softening. "You've learned much, Jonah. Not about fighting, but about being human. That is what matters most." He smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through him. "And you've taught me that appearances can deceive, that masks hide not just faces, but truths. Thank you for showing me what bravery truly is." As they watched the town celebrate, Jonah felt a shift within himself. He realized that the journey, the battles, the fears, they had all led to this moment. A moment where humanity, kindness, and courage had converged, transforming not only the town, but the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. In the quiet of the night, as the fires burned low and the stars reflected in the river, Jonah whispered to himself, "The world is larger than I imagined, and stronger, kinder than I ever knew. And perhaps, just perhaps, it is never too late to become the person we are meant to be." Ayanna's hand brushed his, gentle but firm, a connection forged not in battle, but in shared understanding. They had emerged not just as fighters, but as protectors, as teachers of compassion, as embodiments of humanity's best qualities. And in that moment, as the desert wind carried their laughter and the town's cheers into the night, Jonah understood the profound truth. Sometimes, the greatest battles are not with swords or enemies, but with our own assumptions. And when those are laid aside, when courage meets kindness, the world transforms. The helmet had fallen, revealing a woman warrior. But more importantly, it revealed a truth that would linger far longer than any victory. That strength, compassion, and humanity are inseparable, and the impact of one selfless act can change the world, if only we are brave enough to act.